The sun hung low over the dusty arena, casting a warm copper glow across the wooden rails, and the restless crowd gathered for the late summer horse auction. The air smelled of sweat, saddle leather, and wild grass drifting in from the open plains. People whispered the same words again and again as they glanced toward the center ring. They weren't here for the cattle, and they weren't here for the show. They were here because of the black stallion tied to the post, a creature so fierce that seasoned ranchers kept their distance. Some called the horse a shadow. Others said it carried the spirit of the wilderness. But everyone agreed on one thing: no one could tame it. Yet the woman in the black dress stood there smiling, one hand on her hip, the other pointing boldly at the stallion as if he were nothing more than another stubborn creature refusing to obey her yard gate. She was known across the frontier as a widow of sharp wit and sharper business sense. Folks whispered that she ran her land with more grit than most men in the territory. Her late husband had left her a ranch and a reputation, but she had built the rest of her life with her bare hands. People respected her. A few feared her, and many envied the way she walked into every room as if the world belonged to her. She leaned close to the stallion's dark muzzle, ignoring the warning snorts that sent dust spinning from the ground. A desert wind pulled at her hat, lifting its rim enough to show the spark in her eyes. The same spark she carried whenever she had a point to make. The crowd pressed nearer, waiting to see what this daring frontier woman would do with the wildest horse in the county. Even the auction judge paused mid-step, uncertain whether he should intervene or enjoy the show. She turned her head, voice ringing out across the arena. "If I manage to tame this horse, I'll marry you." Her laughter echoed softly afterward, light but teasing, aimed at a rancher who had been courting her for months. The words rolled across the dirt like a challenge thrown at destiny. People gasped, a few hollered, but most simply stared at the woman with disbelief. The rancher she teased stiffened with embarrassment, tipping his hat as the crowd chuckled, but her laugh didn't last long. As soon as her hand tightened on the rope, the stallion reared, kicking up clots of dirt that scattered across her boots. She stepped back with a calm grin, but everyone could see her pulse quicken. This wasn't a horse that bent easily. This was a creature that moved like thunder, with hooves built to shatter fences and a gaze wild enough to unsettle a sheriff. Among the people standing around the arena was a quiet figure who had remained unnoticed until now. He stood near the far rail, his long dark hair tied back, a feather resting against it like a mark of his people. His broad shoulders and calm stance drew the sun toward him, making him appear carved from the earth itself. He belonged to the Apache, and though many in the crowd eyed him with suspicion, he didn't seem to notice. His focus remained on the stallion, and something in his expression hinted that he understood the animal far better than anyone else there. He watched the widow with a steady, unreadable silence. The black stallion tossed its head again, and for a moment, man and horse seemed to share a secret language that only nature itself could interpret. The Apache man stepped closer, the leather strap across his chest glinting lightly in the sun. The widow's challenge still hung in the air, drifting like wildfire through the arena. People waited to see if she would actually attempt to break that horse in front of everyone. A few whispered that she was brave. Others called her reckless, but no one could look away. The stallion snorted, pawing hard at the ground. The widow lifted the rope again, determined to show she wasn't backing down. She stepped closer, her voice low, steady, carrying the pride of a ranch owner and the stubbornness of someone who refused to lose to an animal. But the horse didn't soften. Its eyes flashed, and its muscles tightened as if preparing to explode from the earth. Then the Apache man moved. Slow at first, almost silent. The crowd noticed the shift in the air before they noticed him. People stepped aside instinctively as he walked toward the center ring. The widow turned her head, eyebrow raised as she saw him approach. The rancher who had been the subject of her teasing watched him with irritation growing in his jaw. The judge hesitated, unsure whether to ask him to step back or simply let the moment unfold. The Apache reached the widow's side, stopping only when he was close enough to touch the stallion if he wished. He didn't reach out, though. He simply looked at the horse with a calm patience that unsettled everyone watching. The stallion lowered its head slightly, nostrils flaring, as if calling out in recognition. The widow narrowed her eyes, unsure whether she should feel challenged or curious. "You planning to offer advice?" she asked softly. "Are you here to watch me win my own wager?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced at her, his expression firm, steady, impossible to read. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, shaped by the rhythm of open plains and long, quiet nights. "This horse will not bow to force," the crowd murmured. A few shifted uncomfortably. People in the frontier weren't used to being corrected in public, especially not by someone they barely understood. The widow tilted her chin up, confident as ever. "Then what will make him bow?" The Apache placed one hand on the rope near her fingers. Not tugging, not claiming control, just grounding it. "You ask him to trust you," he replied, "not fear you." Her heartbeat faltered for a moment. The entire arena seemed to pause, waiting, then, without another word, stepped past her. The rancher scoffed loudly, muttering something under his breath. A few men laughed in agreement, shaking their heads. Some even whispered that the Apache was going to get himself thrown 10 feet into the dirt the moment he touched that horse. But the widow didn't look away. She felt something shifting, something she couldn't quite explain. She had seen fearless men before. She had seen men try to charm danger. But this Apache carried a calm that bordered on unsettling power. It made her pulse quicken in a way she didn't expect. He moved toward the stallion with slow, deliberate breaths. The horse's ears flicked toward him. Its hooves stilled. The tension in the air thickened, like a storm rolling over distant hills. People leaned forward. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The widow's challenge still echoed in her ears. If she tamed the stallion, she would marry the man she had been teasing for months. The whole valley had heard it. There was no taking it back. But as she watched the Apache step closer to the wild horse, something unexpected tightened inside her chest. Something she had not invited. The stallion raised its head, neck arched, eyes locked on the Apache. For a heartbeat, it looked ready to strike. The crowd gasped. The widow stepped forward in warning. Then the Apache placed one foot in the stirrup. Every sound in the arena vanished. The widow's breath trembled as she watched him swing onto the horse's back with the calm of someone born for this moment, and before anyone could blink, the stallion leaped forward, sending dust exploding into the air. Carrying the Apache across the arena in a wave of raw power, the widow froze, her heart slamming against her ribs as the truth hit her harder than the summer heat. Her wager had just taken a turn she never expected, and nothing about her life. Her ranch or her future would remain the same now that the Apache had climbed on. The dust still hung in the air long after the stallion's first bolt across the arena. People rubbed their eyes and shaded their faces, trying to follow the blur of black muscle and the lone rider who somehow managed to stay balanced on its back. The widow stood frozen near the rail, her breath trapped somewhere between shock and something far more complicated. Her challenge had started as a joke, a bold tease thrown into the wind. Now it felt like the wind had carried it farther than she ever intended. The Apache rode with a steadiness that didn't seem human at first glance. Every move he made was controlled, as if he understood every heartbeat of the horse beneath him. The stallion kicked hard, twisting, trying to break free from the weight on its back. But the rider shifted with such natural ease that the crowd fell silent. Even the rancher, who had been the subject of her teasing, stared in disbelief, his confidence shrinking by the second. When the Apache finally guided the stallion into a slowing circle, the arena seemed to breathe again. Dust settled around his silhouette, and the horse, still wild, still powerful, was no longer fighting him. It wasn't tamed, but it was listening, and that was something no one else had achieved. He slid off the horse with a quiet grace, patting its neck once before handing the rope to the auction judge. A hush lingered as he walked away, the sound of each step grounded in calm. The widow felt something unfamiliar as she watched him leave the ring, something that stirred beneath her usual strong posture. The judge called for a break in the auction, giving the crowd a chance to talk, whisper, and argue about what they just witnessed. People gathered in small clusters, repeating every detail as if they had seen a legend born right in front of them. The rancher approached the widow with tight shoulders and the look of a man whose pride had taken a hit. She didn't face him at first. Her eyes were still on the Apache, who had stopped at the edge of the arena and stood near a post as if he belonged there. You didn't have to say what you did, the rancher muttered. Folks are going to take that wager seriously. She finally turned to him with a steady gaze. I'm not afraid of words. Maybe not, he said, jaw clenched. But don't forget there are men who are waiting for any chance to question your place here. She didn't respond. She knew exactly what he meant. Being a widow running a ranch in the frontier wasn't simple. Some people respected her strength, but others saw her independence as an open challenge. Men in saloons whispered that she needed someone to control her land, that she couldn't keep doing everything on her own. And the more successful she became, the louder those whispers grew. The rancher shifted on his boots. You've worked hard for everything you have. A joke like that can start trouble. She weighed his words, but her gaze returned toward the Apache. He wasn't trouble, she said quietly. He was the only one who showed respect to that horse. The rancher didn't like that answer. He tipped his hat stiffly and walked off. Leaving her alone with her thoughts, she stepped away from the rail and moved toward the open side of the arena where the riders rested between events. A few men stared at her as she passed, some with admiration, others with judgment. But she didn't slow her steps. She found the Apache near a water trough, his hands dipped into the cool water as if washing away dust and expectation. Up close, he seemed even more grounded, as though the earth itself supported him with each breath. His face remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he saw far more than he said. You ride differently than anyone I've ever seen, she said, her voice steady, though her pulse fluttered. Where did you learn that he lifted his head, shaking water from his fingertips? From watching, he replied. Horses speak if you know how to listen. His tone didn't carry pride, only truth. She studied him for a moment. His presence drew the attention of others who seemed unsure whether to approach or back away. Some had never seen an Apache man so close, and their unease floated in the air. But she felt none of that unease. If anything, she felt compelled to understand him more. I didn't mean for you to take my wager seriously, she said lightly, though her voice wavered just a hint. But you riding that horse made the whole valley talk. He looked at her with calm intensity. You made the challenge, he said. The horse answered it. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment. It was the strange sense that he wasn't simply referring to the animal. She cleared her throat and glanced at the stallion across the arena. Even from a distance, it stood taller than most horses, its mane tossing in the wind like a banner of defiance. She had wanted that stallion for her ranch, believing it would make her breeding stock unbeatable. But now the situation held more weight than she had planned. Before she could respond, a pair of riders approached, their eyes fixed on the Apache with clear irritation. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a red vest, stepped forward. This ain't your land, he said sharply. And that ain't your place to take rides meant for buyers. The widow stepped between them before the Apache could reply. He didn't take anything, she said. He saved the auction from a disaster. That horse could have broken a man's neck. The rider scoffed. You defending him now? You think one trick makes him some frontier hero? Her voice sharpened. I think skill deserves respect. The Apache stayed silent, watching the interaction without fear. His calm presence only angered the red-vested rider more. Well, the rider sneered. Maybe he should go back where he belongs, before someone decides he's causing trouble. The widow stepped closer, her eyes blazing with warning. If anyone here is causing trouble, it's you. The tension tightened like a rope drawn too hard. The Apache finally spoke, his voice low but firm. I am leaving soon, he said. But I mean no harm. His simple words unsettled the riders, who expected confrontation. The red-vested man muttered something under his breath and walked away with his partner, their boots grinding angrily into the dirt. The widow turned to the Apache again. People around here judge quickly, she said. But not everyone agrees with them. He studied her for a moment as if reading something beyond her words. You stand alone often, he said, even among your own people. She inhaled quietly at the accuracy of his observation. Running a ranch as a widow makes some folks uneasy, she said. They think I should hand everything over to a man or remarry to keep the peace. And what do you think he asked? I think my land is mine, she answered, and I don't need anyone to run it for me." He nodded once, slowly, as if he understood that kind of fight deeply. The wind stirred again, carrying scents of dry grass and summer heat. The auction bell rang, calling people back to the stands. She hesitated before turning away. "Will you stay for the rest of the auction?" she asked. "I came for trade," he replied, "and for a journey south, but I will stay until the horse chooses its next step." His words held a quiet mystery. She walked back toward the stands with her thoughts tangled like rope. Behind her, she could feel his gaze on the arena. Not on her, yet she sensed something unspoken forming between their paths. As people returned to their seats, the judge motioned to bring out the stallion once more. The animal tossed its head, restless, wild, full of a force that seemed almost aware of the eyes upon it. The widow leaned forward slightly, her pulse rising again as she wondered what would unfold. The rancher glared from across the crowd. The riders who had confronted the Apache sat stiffly, their pride wounded, but it wasn't any. Of them who held the real tension, it was the way the stallion's ears kept turning toward the edge of the arena. It was the way the Apache stood there quietly, hands resting at his sides, watching with the same calm that had captured the whole valley only moments ago. And it was the unspoken truth settling into the widow's heart. Whatever roads lay ahead, they had just shifted, and neither she nor the Apache nor the wild stallion had any idea how deeply their fates were about to intertwine. The stallion's next step came sooner than anyone expected. When the judge raised his hand to begin the bidding, the crowd hushed, waiting for the first number to break the air. The widow felt her fingers curl around the rail as if the oak wood were the only thing keeping her anchored. She heard the murmurs about her wager, about the Apache, about what it meant for a woman alone to risk her future in front of the entire frontier town. She had always been the widow with the steel spine, the one who ran her late husband's ranch without apology. Now she felt a new kind of weight settling on her shoulders. Her name was Raina Cole. The Cole ranch stretched across miles of dusty grassland that the wind loved and the bankers wanted. She had fought drought, rustlers, and greedy dealers who tried to pay her less because she was a woman. She had held the line when every neighbor said she should sell half her land and remarry. The Cole brand still burned bright on her cattle because she refused to step aside. This stallion, dark as smoke and strong as a storm, felt like more than a horse to her. It felt like a chance to prove she could still win in a world that kept changing. The judge called for the first offer. Garrick Boone, the rancher who had been courting her, lifted his hand and shouted a number that made a few men whistle. Garrick ran one of the largest spreads in the valley. He was known for hard bargains and a temper that showed whenever a deal slipped away from him. He had decided long ago that combining his land with Raina's would make them the most powerful force for miles around. To him, her hand meant more than affection. It meant control. Another rancher raised the price. Then, another. The stallion pulled against the rope, muscles rippling, hooves scraping the dirt. Raina watched the Apache near the edge of the arena, still silent, still watching. She realized she did not know his name yet. That unsettled her. A man who could ride like that, who could quiet a wild horse with calm eyes, should not remain a mystery. The bidding climbed higher. Garrick's jaw tightened. He kept raising the price, refusing to let anyone else outbid him. From the look on his face, he would sooner sell half his herd than lose that stallion to another ranch. Raina knew why. If he owned the horse, he could claim that her wager belonged to him. A twisted logic, but one the town would happily repeat over drinks. The judge raised his hand, ready to strike the final call. Raina felt her heart hammer. The Cole Ranch bank account flashed through her mind. Fences to repair, feed to buy, hands to pay. She calculated faster than she breathed. The stallion could breed a strong line. It could draw buyers from distant towns. It could be worth more than any, some being shouted now. Her voice broke through the arena. Higher. Heads turned. A murmur rolled across the stands. She named a figure that made even Garrick blink. It was a risk. One wrong season, and her ranch would feel the strain. But she held her chin high, refusing to show doubt. Raina Cole did not step back from a fight. Garrick glared at her, the hurt in his eyes mingling with something darker. If she had let him bid on her behalf, he would have taken it as a sign that she needed him. Instead, she had cut clean through the unspoken story he had been building in his mind. He hesitated only a heartbeat before naming a higher amount. Louder this time, as if volume could push her away. The tension sharpened. People shifted on their seats. The stallion tossed its head again, ears flicking toward the Apache. The judge looked ready to end the madness before someone bankrupted their entire ranch. Raina inhaled slowly. She knew there was one more figure she could risk, the edge of what her ranch could bear. If she shouted it now, there would be no turning back. Before she could speak, however, a third voice cut across the arena, calm and clear. "I will trade." Every eye turned toward the Apache. He stepped forward, the sun outlining his shoulders in gold. The crowd erupted in whispers at once. Trade from a man of his people meant something different than a simple bid. Traders along the frontier knew that Apache goods were rare. Taken from remote trails, carried with skill across dangerous terrains. Sometimes they brought captured horses. Sometimes they carried carved weapons or stones from sacred ground. No one knew what he had. But the very thought unsettled those who believed everything in this valley already belonged to them. The judge frowned. "This auction is coin only." The Apache's gaze didn't waver. "I have 20 head of mountain horses and 2 mules trained for canyon roads," he said. "They are tied in a camp north of here. The stallion will be worth more with their blood beside him." Raina felt the breath catch in her throat. Mountain horses were known for endurance and sure footing. Traders paid good money for even one. 20 was a fortune in movement instead of gold. Garrick snorted. "You expect us to take your word on unseen stock?" The Apache met his hostility with unflinching calm. "My name is Kane Shadowhawk," he said. "My word is worth more than the whiskey that buys it." It was the first time Raina heard his name. Kane Shadowhawk. It suited him, sharp and steady, like the bird that rode the rising currents of the sky. The judge hesitated. The crowd pressed in. Men argued from their seats. Some claimed the deal was foolish. Others said 20 mountain horses could change the entire trade route of the valley. Suspicion toward Kane's people battled with greed for profit. In the old American frontier, battles usually ended in favor of whoever shouted loudest. Raina watched the judge's eyes. He was thinking of coin, but also of the influence Garrick had in town. Still, business was business. A trade of that size could draw new buyers. The judge rubbed his chin, then raised his voice. "I will accept stock as equal value," he said. "But the horses must be seen and counted by morning. Until then, the stallion is held under my brand." He stamped the decision with a wave of his hand and a nod toward Kane. Garrick exploded from his seat. "You cannot be serious," he shouted. "You trust an Apache overpaying ranchers he could vanish before sunrise." The judge shrugged with a tired expression. "He has the right to offer his trade, just as you had the right to bid with your money. If you want the stallion, raise the offer." Garrick's fists clenched. He knew he could not match 20 mountain horses. His land was valuable, but not liquid. To best that offer, he would have to sell stock he did not want to sell. And he would have to admit Raina had more courage than he did today. Raina watched him with a complicated knot in her chest. She had never promised Garrick anything, but she also knew what pride meant out here. Pride kept men standing when the land tried to knock them flat. Wounding it could be like cutting a rope that held a man together. The bidding stalled. No one reached higher than Kane's trade. The judge finally slammed his hand down and called it, "Pending proof of stock, the stallion belongs to Kane Shadowhawk." A shocked silence dropped like a stone. Raina felt her world tilt. Kane nodded once and stepped back from the center, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. People began to talk in heated bursts. Some were curious, others angry. A few were frightened of what it meant that an Apache now held claim to the wildest horse in the valley. Raina's mind spun with questions. Why would he want the stallion? What would he do with it? Where did 20 mountain horses come from? And what did her reckless wager mean now that the animal's new owner was not Garrick, but a man whose life and culture the town barely understood when the auction ended? Riders filtered out, some heading for saloons. others for stables and long trails home. Raina stayed near the rail, waiting. She watched the judge brand the stallion with a temporary mark, then lead it to a strong pen where it could not kick its way free. The animal continued to toss its head toward the place where Cain had been standing, as if offended that the rider had walked away. The sight unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Garrick approached her again, his expression no longer just wounded but edged with cold anger. "You see what you started?" he said harshly. "Now that man thinks he has claim not only to the stallion, but to you?" Her spine straightened. "No one has claimed me," she answered. "My words were a jest, at your expense, nothing more." His eyes darkened. The valley did not hear it as a jest. They heard a promise, and that Apache heard it too. "If he brings those horses tomorrow and the trade holds, you know what people will say? They will claim you spoke your own fate in front of witnesses." Anna's throat tightened. The frontier valued promises, even careless ones. Breaking them could stain a person's name for years. "I said I would marry the man who tamed that stallion," she replied slowly. "I did not say when or how." The words felt thin, even to her own ears. Garrick leaned closer. "You have the right to refuse, but if you do, some men here will use it against you. They will call you a liar. They will claim your word means nothing. They will say that Coal Ranch is led by a woman who plays with honor like a card trick." She looked out over the arena, mind churning. Land, reputation, survival. Everything depended on how the valley viewed her. Cain Shadowhawk had not asked for her hand. He had not spoken one word about the wager. Yet his actions had placed him at the center of a story she'd never planned to write. As twilight pulled a deep red band across the sky, Raina found herself walking toward the outer corral where the stallion had been tied. She meant only to look once more before heading home. Instead, she found Cain there first, standing just beyond the fence, watching the horse in silence. He did not startle when she stepped closer. He seemed to expect her. "You know what this means?" she said quietly. He nodded. "Your people will talk." "My people," she repeated with a faint, bitter smile. "Some of them would rather I had never taken over the ranch at all." "You care what they say?" he observed. "I care that their talk can cost me land and work," she replied. "Cattle buyers can choose another ranch. Bankers can tighten their loans. A word in the wrong ear can change a man's offer in a single day." Cain turned his gaze toward her. The last light of the sun caught in his eyes. "Where I come from," he said, "a promise is a rope that binds both ways. But it is also understood that a rope thrown in jest is not the same as one tied with intention." His words surprised her. He did not sound greedy for her future. He sounded like a man who understood the weight she carried. "Do you expect me to keep the wager?" she asked. He studied her for a long moment. "I expect you to decide what your own word is worth," he said finally. "Not to them." "To you?" The answer did not ease her mind, but it stirred something deeper. A part of her that had grown used to carrying burdens alone felt seen for the first time in years. Behind them, the stallion stamped and snorted, restless in the fading light. The air filled with the sound of hooves and the distant roll of thunder beyond the hills. Storm clouds were forming at the edge of the horizon, dark and slow. They seemed a mirror of the storm building in the valley, one that did not yet have a name. Raina looked from the horse to Cain, and then toward the dim line of her ranch in the distance. The world she had fought for stood on uncertain ground. If Cain failed to bring his horses by morning, the trade would collapse and the stallion would return to auction. If he succeeded, the animal would belong to him, and the valley would press her to answer her own fearless words. Night crept across the sky, but no answers came with it, and as the first distant flash of lightning touched the far ridge, Raina Cole knew that before dawn, she would stand at a crossroads that could change the fate of her ranch. The pride of Garrick Boone and the path of Cain Shadowhawk. The Apache rider who had climbed onto a wild stallion and into the center of her life. The night settled over the valley. In a heavy, unmoving hush, the kind that made every sound feel sharper. Raina stood on her porch long after the auction crowds faded into the darkness. Lantern light flickered across the yard, stretching shadows over the ground like restless spirits. Her ranch hands had gone to bed hours ago, but she remained awake, staring toward the distant hills where Cain's Shadowhawk had said his stock was kept. The storm clouds rolling in from the north made the horizon look bruised, and each low rumble made her heart thump harder. She didn't know if he could make it back by morning. She didn't know if he would even try. She only knew that the entire valley would talk about sunrise. Waiting to see if Cain kept his word or vanished into the night, the weight of her own words pressed against her chest. She could already hear the whispers that would rise at dawn. Some would say she lied. Some would say she was tied to a man she barely knew. Some would say she had lost her mind. The ranchers who already resented her would use the moment to claim she wasn't fit to run land as large and valuable as the coal spread. They would nudge buyers away from her cattle. They would push for higher interest on her loans. Every careless word spoken in that arena could become a tool used against her. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the cold wind tug at her dress. She wasn't afraid of hard work. She wasn't afraid of storms. But she was afraid of losing everything she had fought for. Her land wasn't just soil and fences. It was her independence. It was her promise to her late husband. And it was her promise to herself. Raina finally turned away from the distant hills and stepped inside the house. She set her lantern on the table, watching the flame dance as if unsettled by the wind slipping through the cracks in the walls. She brushed her fingers over the documents stacked neatly on her desk. The ranch's accounts were always balanced, but never comfortably so. One harsh winter or one drought could push her into trouble. Losing buyers would be worse. She tried to steady her thoughts, but Cain's quiet voice echoed again. You decide what your word is worth. Not to them, but to you. She sank into her chair and closed her eyes. His presence had shaken her more than she expected. He spoke little, but every word carried weight, and something inside her felt drawn to the calm he carried like armor. She didn't trust it yet, but she couldn't ignore it. When dawn finally broke, a thin, pale light washed over the ranch. Raina's eyes burned with lack of sleep as she saddled her horse and rode toward the auction yard. The storm clouds had drifted lower, turning the morning sky into a restless swirl of gray. People were already gathering near the pens. Waiting with the sharp eagerness of those expecting a show, Garrick Boone stood near the judge. Arms crossed, frustration carved across his face like a permanent line. A cluster of ranchers formed around him, whispering their opinions with open scowls. Raina felt their eyes on her the moment she rode in. Some nodded. Most judged. There she is. One man muttered loud enough for her to hear. Let's see if her Apache comes back for a wager. Raina ignored him, though heat flashed behind her ribs. She dismounted and brushed the dust from her gloves. She refused to let anyone see her hesitation. She walked toward the judge, each step carrying more weight than she cared to admit. The judge gave her a brief nod. Morning, Raina. We'll give him 1 hour past sunrise. Not a minute more. Swallowed quietly. Fair enough. Garrick turned toward her with an unreadable expression. You're really going to let this happen? You're really ready to hand your word to a man you met yesterday? She looked him in the eye. My word is mine, and I choose how it's used. His jaw twitched. You're playing with fire. Better than living afraid of it, she replied. The ranchers around him murmured again. Some were impressed. Some were irritated. Some were eager to see her fail. The tension in the air thickened with every passing moment. The stallion pawed at the ground inside the pen, snorting with impatience. It seemed to sense the crowd's anxiety. Or maybe it sensed her own. Minutes dragged like hours. The storm clouds edged closer, darkening the sky until it felt like the valley was holding its breath. A growing wind pushed against the wooden pens, rattling their loose boards. The judge checked the position of the sun again. The hour was nearly gone. Raina tried to keep her spine straight, but worry coiled tight inside her. What if Cain didn't return? What if he had lied? What if 20 mountain horses never existed? What if she would stand here, alone with every rancher in the valley ready to tear apart her pride and reputation? Garrick stepped closer. It isn't too late. Tell the judge you withdraw the wager. Say it was a joke. Say you never meant it. You can still walk away. Raina held her ground. I won't run from my own words. Then you'll regret it, he warned. The judge lifted his hand. Time's up, he called. We'll put the stallion back in the next auction." The crowd stirred. Some smirked. Others sighed. A few exchanged coins, having made their own bets on whether Cain would return. Raina felt a hollow ache open inside her chest. Her breath caught. But then a sound rolled over the ridge. A deep drumming, rhythmic, growing louder. The whispers around her turned into startled exclamations as everyone swung their heads toward the hills. A herd burst into view, not wild, not wandering, guided, and at the front, Cain's Shadowhawk rode with calm certainty, leading 20 mountain horses and 2 canyon mules as promised. Their hooves thundered across the earth, kicking up clouds of dust that looked like smoke rising from a battlefield. Their manes whipped in the wind, their long strides smooth and powerful. Raina's heart slammed so hard she almost stepped back. Relief washed through her like warm rain. But alongside it came fear, because Cain had not just kept his word. He had changed everything. The entire valley went silent as he rode into the auction yard. Even the storm paused above them, as if listening. Cain reined his horse to a stop and dismounted without ceremony. The mountain horses followed him into the outer pen with disciplined precision, forming a circle behind him. Dust swirled around his boots as he stepped toward the judge with steady purpose. "Here's my trade," said. The judge stared in stunned silence before nodding. He motioned for the ranch hands to inspect the stock. It didn't take long. Every horse was strong, healthy, and worth far more than anyone expected. "The trade stands," the judge declared. "The stallion belongs to Cain's Shadowhawk." A wave of noise erupted from the crowd. Some shouted in disbelief. Others cursed. A few cheered. Garrick's face darkened with humiliation. He took a step toward Cain, fists clenched, but 2 ranchers held him back. It wasn't worth the fight. Cain ignored them all. He walked toward the stallion's pen. The horse lifted its head sharply, nostrils flaring when Cain approached, like a warrior recognizing another. The Apache opened the gate and stepped inside. The stallion stomped once, muscles rippling, but it didn't charge. Instead, it watched him with wild eyes that slowly softened. Raina could hardly breathe. She couldn't look away. Cain placed his hand on the stallion's neck. The animal accepted it. The crowd erupted again, louder this time. A few men shook their heads, muttering that no horse should bow to someone like him. But there was awe in their voices too. Fear mixed with respect. Raina stepped closer, drawn by something she didn't fully understand. Cain turned his head, meeting her eyes across the fence. His expression carried no triumph, only understanding, only calm. "You kept your word," she said softly. "So did you," he answered. Her breath tightened. "My words set off something I didn't expect." His gaze held steady. "Your words carried your truth." The storm clouds rumbled overhead. Raina felt the tension building again, stronger than before. The rancher's whispers grew louder. Garrick's frustration deepened. Her future stretched in front of her, like a trail covered in fog. Cain stood beside the stallion, a living symbol of the change sweeping across her fate. The valley watched them with hungry curiosity. The conflict between old expectations and new paths had never felt sharper, and the storm, both outside and inside her, had only begun to break. The road to the climax waited just ahead. The stakes were rising, and neither Raina nor Cain had any idea how close they were to the moment that would decide everything. The storm finally broke the moment the stallion accepted Cain's hand. Thunder rolled across the valley like a great drum echoing through the sky, and a rush of cool wind swept through the auction yard. People hurried back under the open sheds and canvas roofs as the first drops of rain hit the dirt in soft, scattered taps. Raina didn't move from her place near the pen. Her eyes stayed on Cain and the wild horse that had changed everything. She felt the world shifting inside her, settling into shapes she had never expected and never asked for. Yet somehow they felt like they belonged. Cain opened the gate, leading the stallion out into the open space of the yard as if he had done it his whole life. The animal walked beside him with a proud, watchful gait. Its mane, wet from the first touch of rain, clung to its neck like a dark banner. Raina stepped forward, her boots meeting the wet earth. The tension that had wrapped around the valley for days seemed to soften under the sound of falling rain. Garrick Boone had not softened, though. He stood near the sheds, drenched in anger more than rain. His pride had taken a blow that he could not hide. And Raina knew he would need time before he understood that losing this fight did not mean losing his worth. She hoped he would come to see that bitterness only harmed the one who carried it. She walked toward Cain, her heartbeat steadying with each step. "The valley will talk for years about today," she said quietly. "That is their choice," he replied. "We cannot stop their stories. We can only shape our own." The simplicity of his words grounded her. It wasn't about rumors. It wasn't about who judged her. It was about the life she chose for herself. She took a breath, lifting her chin slightly. "There's something I need to decide," she said. "And I want to say it in my own time." Cain nodded. "Your time is yours." Rain pattered softly against the rails, filling the air with a fresh scent. The judge approached, hat soaked and eyebrows heavy with moisture. "Well," he grumbled, "I've been part of this auction for 20 years and never seen anything like it. Shadowhawk, your trade stands. And Raina, your wager was witnessed by half the valley. But how you choose to handle it is your business. This town may talk, but they don't decide what you do." Raina appreciated the judge's honesty. She felt a bit of the pressure lift from her shoulders. She turned to the stallion, watching as Cain stroked its neck with quiet assurance. "What will you do with him now?" she asked. "Ride," Cain said, "and learn him as he learns me. A horse like this is not claimed. He is accompanied. He chooses the one he runs beside." Raina found herself smiling. The stallion's dark eyes flicked toward her. "He seems to trust you," she said. "He trusts strength, wrapped in calm." Cain replied softly. Rain grew heavier, urging people to hurry home. Raina pulled her coat tighter and motioned toward her ranch. "Come with me," she said. "The storm will get worse. You and your horses need shelter. My barn is strong." He hesitated only slightly before nodding. "I accept." They moved together across the valley as thunder rolled over the hills. Cain guided the mountain horses with ease, Raina riding beside him with a sense of companionship she hadn't expected. When they reached the Cole Ranch, her hands worked quickly to prepare the barn, opening stalls and laying extra hay. Her ranch hands appeared with coats pulled over their heads. Surprised to see an Apache leading a herd through their gates, one worker stepped forward cautiously. "Ma'am, everything all right?" Raina nodded. "Everything's fine. Make room for the horses. They'll stay here until the storm passes." The men exchanged glances but trusted her judgment. They had seen her make bold decisions before, and she had never led the ranch into trouble. Once the horses were settled, Raina and Cain stood near the barn doors, watching the rain pour like sheets of silver over the land. Lightning lit the distant fence lines. Her ranch looked stronger than ever under the storm, grounded and unshaken. She felt proud of what she had built. "You carry more weight than most," Cain said gently. "I've carried it alone for a long time," she admitted. "You do not have to." His words were not a request. They were an offering, calm, steady, free of pressure. She felt warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar yet comforting inside the barn. The stallion paced its stall, restless from the storm. Cain entered the pen, speaking softly to calm it. Raina watched from outside, amazed at how the animal responded to his presence. The stallion lowered its head as he stroked its powerful neck, accepting reassurance from the man who had proven himself not with force, but with understanding. As the storm raged, Raina stepped inside the stall as well. The horse turned its gaze toward her, more curious than hostile. She lifted her hand slowly. The stallion lowered its muzzle toward her palm, warm breath brushing her fingers. A quiet connection passed between them, a shared understanding of strength and survival. Cain watched her with a faint smile. "He accepts you." "I accept him too," she whispered. For a moment, the storm felt far away. Only the three of them stood there, bound by a moment that felt larger than the walls around them. Hours later, the rain softened to a gentle patter. The valley glistened under the fading storm clouds. Raina stepped outside, breathing in the clean air. Cain joined her, his presence steady beside her. She turned to him, finally ready to face the words she had spoken at the auction. "About the wager," she said. "I know what the valley expects me to do. But expectations don't guide my life." "What guides it?" Cain asked. "My own heart," she replied. "And my own truth? What is your truth today?" She looked at him carefully. "I made a promise in jest, but I don't want my life tied to a joke. I want it tied to choice, to trust, to something real." Cain nodded slowly. "Then choose." She took a long breath, grounding herself in the moment. "I choose honesty. I choose strength. I choose to stand beside someone who listens to the world the way you do." She felt no fear speaking these words, only clarity. Cain studied her with a calm warmth that eased every last piece of tension inside her. "Then we walk forward together," he said. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting soft gold across the valley. The horses grazed peacefully near the barn. The stallion lifted its head, watching Reyna and Cain like a sentinel of their new beginning. When word spread across the valley, people talked as expected. Some whispered surprise, others envy, others quiet admiration. But over time, talk settled into acceptance. The Cole Ranch grew stronger than ever, shaped by Reyna's leadership and supported by Cain's wisdom. Their partnership, built on respect, not rumor, brought balance to both their lives. Garrick eventually swallowed his pride and returned to friendly terms, understanding that strength came in many forms. The valley learned to see Cain as a skilled horseman and a man of honor, not a stranger to fear. As seasons passed, the black stallion became known not as the wild horse of the auction, but as the proud animal that carried two powerful souls toward a shared future. Reyna often stood beside Cain on quiet evenings, watching the horizon stretch wide and open. Her heart was finally settled, not because the valley approved, but because she had chosen a life shaped by truth, courage, and trust. And in that choice, she found her own lasting happiness, carried forward on the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the calm strength of a man who rode beside her, not ahead of her. The valley remembered that story for generations, and every time a storm rolled in across the hills, people said it sounded like the wild stallion running proud, carrying the spirit of a love that began with a wager and ended with a partnership stronger than the frontier winds.